The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan air like a knife through butter. Inside the aircraft, 8 Navy SEALs sat in complete silence, their faces painted with desert camouflage and their eyes focused on the mission ahead. The only sound was the steady thrum of the engines and the occasional crackle of radio chatter from the cockpit. Lieutenant Commander Jake checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The insertion was scheduled for 300 hours, and they were running right on time. He glanced around at his team, men he had served with for years, men he trusted with his life. There was Petty Officer First Class Tank Williams, a mountain of a man who could carry a wounded teammate for miles without breaking a sweat. Next to him sat Chief Petty Officer Ghost, the team's sniper, whose steady hands had saved their lives countless times. The addition to their unit sat near the back of the helicopter, and Jake couldn't help but steal glances in that direction. Hospital Corpsman Second Class had been assigned to their team just 3 weeks ago, replacing their longtime medic who had been injured in a training accident. The decision to assign a female corpsman to an elite SEAL team had raised eyebrows throughout the command structure, but orders were orders. Kept her eyes fixed on her medical bag, checking and rechecking her supplies. She had worked hard to earn her place here, graduating at the top of her corpsman class and completing additional combat medical training that few sailors ever attempted. At 26, she was younger than most of the SEALs on the team, but her medical knowledge was extensive. She had studied every possible battlefield injury scenario, memorized drug dosages, and practiced emergency procedures until they became second nature. The other team members had been polite but distant since her arrival. They weren't openly hostile, but she could feel their skepticism. During training exercises, she noticed how they would position themselves slightly closer to each other, creating an invisible barrier between her and the rest of the group. When they spoke about previous missions or shared stories from their deployments, their voices would drop to whispers when she approached. Jake had tried to integrate her into the team, but even he seemed uncertain about how to handle the situation. During briefings, he would address her formally as Corpsman, while the other team members were simply called by their nicknames or first names. She understood the challenge she represented. These men had worked together for years, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and reactions. Now they were being asked to trust someone new, someone different. The mission they were heading into was straightforward on paper, but dangerous in execution. Intelligence had identified a high-value target holed up in a compound in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The target was believed to be a key figure in coordinating attacks against coalition forces, and capturing him alive was the primary objective. The compound was located in a remote area, accessible only by foot after the helicopter insertion. Had studied the mission brief extensively. The target compound was situated on a rocky outcrop surrounded by steep terrain. There were limited escape routes, which worked in their favor, but it also meant limited options if things went wrong. The nearest medical evacuation point was over 40 miles away, and helicopter extraction would be impossible if the weather turned bad. As the helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, could feel her heart rate increasing. This was her first combat mission with the team, and she knew that every move she made would be scrutinized. The SEALs had made it clear that they expected her to keep up and stay out of their way. She had no intention of doing anything less than excelling. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by jagged rocks and sparse vegetation. The helicopter touched down for less than 30 seconds, just long enough for the team to jump out with their equipment. Felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as her boots hit the ground, and she immediately moved to her assigned position in the formation. Jake gave hand signals to establish their movement pattern. Tank took point, using his massive frame and keen eyesight to spot potential threats. Ghost positioned himself with an elevated view of their route, ready to provide sniper support if needed. The other team members spread out in a tactical formation that they had practiced hundreds of times. Found herself in the middle of the formation, protected by the more experienced operators, but close enough to respond quickly if someone was injured. As they began moving through the rocky terrain, she was impressed by how silently the SEALs moved despite their heavy equipment. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. The hike to the target compound took nearly 3 hours. The terrain was more challenging than their intelligence had suggested, with loose rocks that could easily cause a twisted ankle and steep sections that required careful climbing. Was grateful for her extensive physical training as she worked to keep up with the team's pace. About halfway to their destination, Ghost raised his fist, signaling the team to stop. Through his scope, he had spotted two men walking along a ridgeline about 800 yards away. The team immediately took cover behind a cluster of large rocks and waited. The men appeared to be local herders, but in this region, distinguishing between innocent civilians and enemy fighters was nearly impossible. Jake made the decision to wait and observe. For 20 minutes, the team remained motionless as the two figures moved slowly along the ridge. Used the time to check her equipment once more and review the compound layout in her mind. She had memorized every room, every potential entry point, and every possible location where casualties might occur. When the figures finally disappeared over the ridge, the team resumed their movement. They were now less than a mile from the target compound, and the tension was palpable. Each SEAL became more focused, more alert to their surroundings. Could see the change in their body language, the way they held their weapons, the increased frequency of hand signals between team members. As they crested a small hill, the target compound came into view. It was exactly as described in their briefings, a two-story building constructed of local stone and mud brick, surrounded by a low wall. Several smaller outbuildings dotted the area around the main structure. No lights were visible, but that didn't mean the compound was unoccupied. Jake positioned his team for observation. Using night vision equipment, they watched the compound for over an hour, looking for signs of activity. They spotted two guards walking patrol routes around the perimeter and identified at least 3 other heat signatures inside the main building. The plan called for a coordinated assault from 2 directions. Tank and 2 other SEALs would approach from the east, while Jake led the remaining team members in from the west. Would stay with Jake's group, positioned where she could respond quickly to any casualties from either assault team. At exactly 6:30 hours, the assault began. Both teams moved simultaneously, using the pre-dawn darkness to mask their approach. Watched through her night vision as the SEALs moved like shadows across the compound. Their training was evident in every step, every gesture, every coordinated movement. The first indication that something was wrong came when Tank's voice crackled through their radio headsets. Multiple contacts inside the main building, more than intelligence estimated. Could hear the sound of gunfire erupting from the eastern side of the compound. Jake immediately adjusted their plan, directing his team to accelerate their approach from the west. Followed closely behind, her medical bag secured but easily accessible. The sound of automatic weapons fire was getting louder, and she could see muzzle flashes through the windows of the main building. As Jake's team reached the western wall of the compound, an explosion rocked the eastern side of the building. Felt the shock wave and saw debris flying through the air. Over the radio, she heard Tank calling for immediate medical assistance. Man down, need Corpsman now." Without waiting for orders, was already moving. She vaulted over the low wall and sprinted across the compound's courtyard, her medical training taking over completely. Behind her, she could hear Jake shouting something, but her focus was entirely on reaching the wounded SEAL. The scene she encountered was worse than anything she had prepared for. The explosion had been caused by an improvised explosive device hidden near the main entrance. 2 SEALs were down, and Tank was applying pressure to a massive wound on one man's leg while trying to coordinate the ongoing firefight. Dropped to her knees beside the most seriously wounded SEAL. It was Petty Officer 2nd Class David "Rocket" Martinez, and his injuries were immediately life-threatening. Shrapnel had torn through his right leg, severing his femoral artery. Blood was pouring from the wound despite Tank's efforts to control it. "I need space," shouted over the noise of continued gunfire. Without hesitation, she began working with a speed and precision that surprised even her. She had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times, but the reality of combat was far more intense than any simulation. Quickly established an IV line while simultaneously working to control the bleeding. The femoral artery was the body's largest artery, and Martinez was losing blood at a rate that would kill him within minutes if she couldn't get it under control. She applied a tourniquet above the wound, but the shrapnel had caused multiple puncture wounds that required individual attention. While worked on Martinez, the second wounded SEAL, Petty Officer 1st Class James Slider, was conscious but had taken shrapnel to his shoulder and chest. The wounds appeared serious but not immediately life-threatening. Made a quick triage decision, focusing her immediate attention on Martinez while giving instructions for self-aid. I need you to maintain pressure on that chest wound, she called out while never taking her hands away from Martinez's leg. Use your left hand. Keep steady pressure and let me know immediately if you start feeling dizzy or short of breath. The firefight was still raging around them, but had entered what combat medics call the zone. Her training had taken over completely, and she was functioning on pure instinct and muscle memory. She could hear bullets whizzing overhead and the shouts of the other SEALs as they continued to clear the building, but her entire focus was on saving Martinez's life. Tank was providing security while worked, his massive frame positioned between her and the ongoing firefight. She could see the concern in his eyes as he watched her work with an intensity and skill that none of them had expected from their new corpsman. Had managed to get Martinez's bleeding under control, but his blood pressure was dangerously low from blood loss. She needed to get fluids into him quickly, and the IV she had established wasn't sufficient. Working with steady hands despite the chaos around her, she established a second IV line and began pushing fluids and blood expanders. His pressure is too low, she called out to Tank. I need to get him stabilized before we can move him. Was calculating medication dosages in her head while monitoring Martinez's pulse and breathing. His skin was pale and clammy, classic signs of hypovolemic shock from blood loss. The gunfire from inside the building was beginning to slow down, indicating that Jake's team was gaining control of the situation, but knew that their biggest challenge was still ahead of them. They were 40 miles from the nearest medical facility, and Martinez needed immediate surgical intervention to survive. As continued working on Martinez, she became aware that the other SEALs were watching her with a mixture of amazement and respect. Her movements were confident and precise, and she was clearly comfortable operating under pressure. Tank, who had initially been skeptical about having a female corpsman on the team, found himself impressed by her competence and composure. Tank said quietly, "I've never seen anyone work that fast under fire," acknowledged his comment with a brief nod but never took her attention away from her patient. Martinez's vital signs were slowly stabilizing, but she knew they weren't out of danger yet. Over the radio, Jake's voice crackled through their headsets. "Compound secured. What's the status on our wounded?" Keyed her radio while continuing to monitor Martinez's IV lines. "One urgent surgical, one priority. Martinez has a severed femoral artery and significant blood loss. He's stable for now, but he needs immediate evacuation to a surgical facility." There was a brief pause before Jake responded. "Copy that. I'm calling for immediate." Knew that getting a medical evacuation helicopter into their current location would be challenging, especially with the ongoing security concerns in the area. While they waited for evacuation orders, turned her attention to injuries. The shrapnel had punctured his shoulder muscle and created several deep cuts on his chest, but it appeared that no major organs had been damaged. She cleaned and dressed his wounds while continuing to monitor Martinez's condition. "How are you feeling?" asked as she worked on his shoulder wound. "Like I got hit by a truck, but I'll live," replied with a weak grin. "Thanks to you, Doc." The use of the nickname Doc wasn't lost on. It was the first time any of the team members had used anything other than her formal rank and last name. As finished treating wounds, she noticed that several other team members had gathered around them. Ghost had taken up an overwatch position, but the others were watching her work with obvious admiration. Her performance under fire had exceeded all of their expectations. Jake approached the group, having completed his sweep of the compound. The mission had been successful. They had captured the high-value target and secured valuable intelligence materials. But the successful completion of their primary mission had been overshadowed by the casualties they had taken. "Good work," Jake said simply. Could hear something different in his voice, a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "How soon can we move Martinez?" Checked Martinez's pulse and blood pressure once more. His condition had stabilized, but he was still in critical condition. "He's stable enough for transport, but we need to move carefully. Any jarring movement could restart the bleeding." The team worked together to prepare an improvised stretcher using equipment from their packs. Supervised the process, ensuring that Martinez was properly secured and that his IV lines wouldn't be disturbed during movement. She had calculated that they had perhaps 2 hours before Martinez's condition would begin to deteriorate again without surgical intervention. As they prepared to move out toward their extraction point, felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Tank, and his expression was serious. He said quietly, "I owe you an apology, we all do. What you did here tonight, that was extraordinary." Looked around at the faces of her teammates. For the first time since joining the unit, she saw acceptance in their eyes. The invisible barrier that had existed between her and the rest of the team seemed to have dissolved during those critical minutes when she had fought to save Martinez's life. "We're a team," replied simply. "That's what teams do." As they began the long trek back to their extraction point, carrying their wounded teammates through the treacherous mountain terrain, knew that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer the outsider, the new corpsman who had to prove herself. She had become an integral part of the team through her actions under fire. The journey ahead would be challenging, and Martinez's life still hung in the balance. But as they moved through the darkness toward their extraction point, felt a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. She had found her place among these elite warriors, not through any special accommodation or lowered standards, but through demonstrating the same courage, competence, and commitment to her teammates that they demonstrated to each other. The eastern sky was beginning to show the first hints of dawn as the team made their way through the rocky terrain. Walked beside the stretcher carrying Martinez, constantly monitoring his condition and adjusting his IV drip rate as needed. Behind them, the compound that had been their target was now quiet, but the memory of the firefight and the moment when everything had changed would stay with all of them forever. In the distance, could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Their extraction was coming, and with it, the chance to get Martinez to the medical care he desperately needed. As she looked up at the brightening sky, realized that this mission had been about more than capturing a high-value target or gathering intelligence. For her, it had been about earning her place among some of the most elite warriors in the world and proving that courage and competence know no gender. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder and felt a surge of relief. Martinez was going to make it. They were all going to make it. And from this moment forward, she knew that she would never again be seen as just the new corpsman who happened to be a woman. She was now simply the medic who had saved a SEAL's life under fire and who had earned her place on one of the Navy's most elite teams through her actions when it mattered most. The medical evacuation helicopter descended through the early morning sky like a mechanical angel, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris as it settled onto the rocky landing zone. Had been monitoring Martinez's vital signs throughout the 2-hour trek from the compound, adjusting his medication and fluid levels to keep him stable during the grueling journey over rough terrain. The helicopter's crew chief jumped out before the aircraft had fully touched down, rushing toward the team with a medical stretcher. Immediately began coordinating the transfer of her patient, shouting medical information over the roar of the engines to the flight medic who had accompanied the evacuation crew. Severed femoral artery, significant blood loss, 2 units of fluid replacement, tourniquet applied for approximately 4 hours, reported rapidly as they loaded Martinez onto the helicopter's stretcher system. BP is holding at 90/60, pulse is 120 and steady. He's been stable for transport but needs immediate surgical intervention. The flight medic, a seasoned Navy corpsman with years of combat experience, looked at with obvious respect as he took over Martinez's care. "Outstanding work, corpsman. This man owes you his life." Felt a surge of pride at the recognition from another medical professional, but her focus remained entirely on her patient's welfare. As the helicopter lifted off with Martinez and aboard, watched until it disappeared into the distance. She had done everything possible under the circumstances, but she knew that the next few hours would be critical for Martinez's recovery. The field surgery she had performed to control his bleeding had bought him time, but he would need extensive surgical repair of his damaged artery and muscle tissue. Jake gathered the remaining team members for a brief debrief before they moved to their secondary extraction point. The mission had been successful despite the casualties they had taken. The high-value target was in custody, and they had recovered significant intelligence materials that would help prevent future attacks against coalition forces. Jake said as the team prepared to move out, "Your performance tonight was exceptional. I've never seen field medicine performed at that level under combat conditions." Could see that the other team members were nodding in agreement. The respect in their eyes was genuine and hard-earned. Ghost, who had been providing overwatch during the medical treatment, approached as they walked toward their extraction point. "Doc," he said quietly, using the nickname that had emerged during the firefight, "I've worked with a lot of corpsmen over the years. What you did back there, that was special." appreciated the recognition, but she was still processing everything that had happened during the mission. The transition from being an outsider to being accepted as a full team member had occurred in the span of a few critical minutes. She realized that all of her medical training and preparation had been leading to this moment, when theory became reality and academic knowledge transformed into life-saving action. The secondary extraction point was located in a valley approximately 5 miles from their original landing zone. As they made their way through the increasingly rugged terrain, found herself walking alongside Tank, who had witnessed her medical work up close during the firefight. "Doc," Tank said after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, "I have to be honest with you. When they first told us we were getting a female Corpsman, most of us weren't happy about it. We figured it was some kind of political decision that would compromise our operational effectiveness." Had suspected as much, but hearing it stated so directly was still somewhat jarring. "What changed your mind?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Watching you work on Martinez," Tank replied immediately. "The way you took charge of that medical emergency, the speed and confidence of your treatment, the way you never lost focus despite bullets flying around us. That wasn't about being male or female. That was about being a damn good medic who knew exactly what she was doing." As they continued toward their extraction point, other team members began opening up to in ways they hadn't during her first 3 weeks with the unit. She learned that several of them had been wounded in previous deployments and had experienced varying levels of medical care under combat conditions. They all agreed that its performance had been extraordinary, not just for a new team member, but by any standard. Chief Petty Officer, whose sniper skills had earned him the nickname Ghost, shared his perspective as they navigated a particularly challenging section of rocky terrain. "The thing about being a SEAL," he explained to, "is that we're all specialists, but we also have to trust each other completely. When bullets start flying, you need to know that every member of your team is going to perform at the highest level." Understood what he was saying. Trust among elite military units wasn't something that could be mandated or artificially created. It had to be earned through demonstrated competence under pressure. Her actions during the firefight had accomplished in minutes what might otherwise have taken months of training exercises and deployed operations. The extraction helicopter arrived at the designated time, and the team quickly boarded for the flight back to their forward operating base. During the flight, found herself thinking about Martinez and wondering how his surgery was progressing. She had maintained radio contact with the medical facility until they were out of range, and the last report indicated that he had been rushed into emergency surgery immediately upon arrival. Back at the base, was summoned to a debrief with the mission commander, a Navy captain who oversaw SEAL operations in the region. She had expected a routine questioning about the medical aspects of the mission, but the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Corpsman," the captain began, reviewing a file on his desk, "I've received some interesting reports about your performance during last night's operation. Lieutenant Commander has submitted a recommendation for a combat action award, and I've also received similar recommendations from several enlisted members of the team." Was stunned. She had been focused entirely on doing her job and hadn't considered that her actions might be worthy of formal recognition. "Sir, I was just doing what I was trained to do," she replied. The captain looked up from the file with a slight smile. "Corpsman, I've been in the Navy for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of medical personnel perform under combat conditions. What you did last night went well beyond just doing your job. You saved a SEAL's life under extraordinarily difficult circumstances, and you did it with a level of skill and composure that impressed some of the most experienced operators in our inventory." Left the debrief feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the recognition she was receiving. She had joined the Navy to serve her country and help people, but she hadn't anticipated how deeply satisfying it would feel to earn the respect of elite warriors through her professional competence. Later that day, received word that Martinez had successfully completed surgery and was expected to make a full recovery. The surgical team had confirmed her field diagnosis and treatment, noting that her rapid intervention had undoubtedly saved his life. Felt a profound sense of relief and satisfaction knowing that her teammate would return to his family whole and healthy. The team was given 48 hours of downtime following the mission, and was surprised to find herself included in their informal gatherings for the first time since joining the unit. The barriers that had previously existed seemed to have completely dissolved. replaced by the easy camaraderie that comes with shared combat experience. During one of these gatherings, Tank shared a story about a previous deployment where their corpsman had been killed by an IED explosion. "We were without medical support for 6 weeks after that," he explained too. "We had basic first aid training, but nothing like what you did for Martinez. 3 of us were wounded during that period, and we had to evacuate them with field dressings and hope for the best." Began to understand the weight of responsibility that came with being the team's medical specialist. These men operated in some of the most dangerous environments in the world, often far from conventional medical support. Their lives literally depended on her skills and judgment, and they needed to have complete confidence in her abilities. Ghost shared his own perspective on the mission and its performance. "The thing that impressed me most," he said, "wasn't just your medical skills, though those were obviously excellent. It was the way you moved under fire. You didn't hesitate, you didn't panic, and you didn't freeze up. You just did what needed to be done." Reflected on that observation and realized that all of her training had prepared her not just medically, but mentally for that moment. The combat medical training she had completed had included scenarios designed to simulate the stress and chaos of battlefield conditions. While nothing could fully prepare someone for actual combat, that training had given her the mental framework to function effectively under extreme pressure. As the team prepared for their next mission assignment, noticed that the dynamics within the group had fundamentally changed. She was now included in all planning discussions, not just the medical aspects. Her opinions were sought on tactical matters, and she was treated as a full partner in mission planning rather than just a specialist who would be called upon if someone was wounded. Jake pulled aside during one of their planning sessions to discuss her integration into the team. "Doc, I want you to know that what happened on that last mission changed everything for this unit. We've operated with the same core group for almost 3 years, and we've never had someone integrate as quickly or as completely as you have." Appreciated Jake's comments, but she was also curious about something that had been bothering her. "Sir, can I ask you something? Why do you think the team was so resistant to accepting me initially? I mean, beyond the obvious gender issue." Jake considered her question carefully before responding. "It wasn't really about you personally, Doc. It was about the unknown. We had worked with our previous corpsman for 2 years. We knew exactly how he would react in any situation, what his capabilities were, what his limitations were. When someone new comes into a unit like this, especially someone different from what we're used to, there's always going to be anxiety about how that will affect our operational effectiveness." Nodded, understanding Jake's explanation. Elite military units functioned like finely tuned machines, with each member playing a specific role that complemented the others. Introducing a new variable into that equation, regardless of the individual's qualifications, would naturally create uncertainty and concern. The team's next mission briefing revealed that they would be conducting a direct action raid on a suspected weapons cache in a mountainous region near the Pakistani border. Intelligence indicated that the cache contained advanced explosives that were being used to construct roadside bombs targeting coalition convoys. As studied the mission planning materials, she realized that this operation would present different challenges from their previous mission. The target area was more remote, with even longer evacuation distances to medical facilities. Additionally, the intelligence suggested that they might encounter a larger number of enemy fighters, increasing the probability of casualties. During the medical planning phase, worked closely with Jake to identify potential casualty evacuation routes and establish contingency plans for various medical scenarios. She calculated the maximum amount of medical supplies she could carry given the mission's duration and the challenging terrain they would encounter. Also spent time with each team member, reviewing their individual medical histories and discussing any concerns they might have about the upcoming operation. She learned that, who was still recovering from his shoulder wound, would be replaced by another SEAL for this mission to ensure he had adequate time to heal. The replacement operator was Petty Officer First Class Michael Hammer Jackson, a veteran SEAL with extensive combat experience. Was curious to see how her newfound acceptance within the team would translate to working with someone who hadn't witnessed her performance during the previous mission. Hammer's initial interactions with were polite but somewhat distant, similar to how the other team members had behaved when she first joined the unit. She realized that her acceptance by the core team didn't automatically extend to new members, and she would need to prove herself again with each new person she worked with. During a pre-mission training exercise, had the opportunity to demonstrate her medical skills to Hammer when Tank suffered a minor training injury. While treating Tank's sprained ankle, noticed that Hammer was observing her technique and listening to her explanations of the treatment process. "Doc," Hammer said after had finished treating Tank, "Ghost told me about what happened on your last mission, said you performed some kind of miracle under fire." Could hear a note of skepticism in his voice, as if he wasn't entirely convinced by second-hand reports. Understood Hammer's position. Military personnel, especially elite operators, tended to be skeptical of claims about exceptional performance until they witnessed it personally. She knew that the only way to earn Hammer's confidence would be through her actions, not through stories told by others. As the team continued their pre-mission preparations, focused on ensuring that her medical equipment was optimized for the specific challenges they expected to encounter. The remote location of their target meant that she might need to treat casualties for several hours before evacuation would be possible, so she packed additional supplies and medications to cover extended care scenarios. Also reviewed the latest intelligence reports about enemy tactics in the region. Recent attacks had involved the use of explosively formed penetrators, a type of roadside bomb that created high-velocity metal projectiles capable of penetrating armored vehicles. If the team encountered these weapons, the resulting injuries would be severe and would require immediate surgical intervention. The night before their deployment, found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing through various medical scenarios and treatment protocols. She had performed exceptionally well on her first combat mission, but she knew that each operation presented unique challenges, and there was no guarantee that she would be able to maintain that level of performance. Tank found in the base's medical facility, where she was conducting a final inventory of her supplies. "Having trouble sleeping, Doc?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Just going through my checklist one more time," replied, though they both knew that she had checked her equipment multiple times already. Tank sat down beside her and spoke in the gentle tone that his friends knew contrasted sharply with his intimidating physical presence. "Doc, I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still get nervous before big missions. The day you stop feeling that anxiety is the day you need to find a different job." Appreciated Tank's reassurance, but she was also dealing with the additional pressure of knowing that her performance would be scrutinized more closely than that of her male counterparts. Any mistake she made would be viewed not just as an individual failure, but as evidence that women weren't suited for elite combat roles. "Tank said quietly, what if I can't perform at the same level next time? What if that last mission was just beginner's luck?" Tank looked at with surprise. "Doc, what you did for Martinez wasn't luck. That was years of training, natural ability, and the kind of calm under pressure that can't be taught. You've got nothing to prove to any of us anymore." Realized that Tank was right. She had already proven herself to the team, and continuing to doubt her abilities would only undermine her confidence and effectiveness. As she finished her equipment check and prepared for the mission ahead, she focused on the knowledge and training that had served her so well during her first combat operation. The morning of the mission dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for their helicopter insertion into the mountains. As boarded the aircraft with her teammates, she felt the same surge of adrenaline she had experienced on her first mission, but this time it was tempered by confidence rather than anxiety. She looked around at the faces of her teammates and saw the same focused determination she had witnessed before. But now she also saw something else, complete acceptance of her as an integral member of their team. She was no longer the new Corpsman trying to prove herself. She was Doc, the medic who had saved a SEAL's life under fire and earned her place among some of the most elite warriors in the world. The helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying the SEAL team toward their target deep in the Afghan mountains. Sat with her medical bag secured between her knees, her mind focused on the mission ahead. The weapons cache they were targeting was believed to contain enough explosives to supply bomb makers for months, and intelligence suggested it was heavily guarded. Hammer, the new team member replacing, sat across from in the helicopter's cramped cabin. Throughout their pre-mission training, he had remained somewhat aloof, polite, but clearly withholding judgment about her capabilities. Understood his position. In elite units, trust wasn't given freely. It had to be earned through demonstrated performance under pressure. Jake reviewed the mission timeline once more through their radio headsets. Insertion at 400 hours, 3-mile movement to target, assault at 6:30. Weather forecast shows clear skies, so we'll have good visibility but also increased risk of enemy observation during our approach. The target was a series of caves carved into a steep mountainside, accessible only through narrow paths that wound between massive boulders. Intelligence indicated that the weapon's cache was stored in the largest cave, with at least 6 guards maintaining security around the clock. Had studied the terrain extensively and identified several locations where casualties might be difficult to evacuate due to the rocky environment. As the helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, could see the jagged peaks surrounding them silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The landing zone was a small plateau about the size of a football field, surrounded by steep slopes covered with loose rock. It would be a challenging insertion, requiring precise flying in difficult terrain. The helicopter touched down briefly, just long enough for the team to quickly exit with their equipment. Felt her boots hit the rocky ground and immediately moved to her assigned position in the team's formation. The night air was crisp and thin at this altitude, and she could see her breath forming small clouds as she breathed. Ghost took point as they began their movement toward the target, his night vision equipment allowing him to navigate the treacherous terrain while watching for signs of enemy activity. The team moved in single file through narrow passages between towering rock formations, their progress slow but steady. Found herself impressed once again by the SEAL's ability to move silently through challenging terrain. Despite carrying heavy packs and weapons, each team member placed his feet carefully to avoid dislodging loose stones that might alert enemy sentries to their presence. About an hour into their movement, Ghost raised his fist, signaling the team to stop and take cover. Through his scope, he had spotted 2 enemy sentries positioned on a rocky outcrop above their planned route. The sentries appeared to be equipped with night vision equipment and were scanning the approaches to the cave complex. Jake quickly assessed their options. They could attempt to bypass the sentries by taking a longer route, but that would add at least an hour to their movement and increase the risk of being discovered by other guards. Alternatively, Ghost could attempt to neutralize the sentries with his sniper rifle, but gunfire would alert the entire enemy force to their presence. The team leader made his decision. Ghost would eliminate the sentries simultaneously using suppressed weapons, while the rest of the team prepared to accelerate their approach to the cave complex. Checked her medical equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was easily accessible if casualties occurred during the assault. Ghost positioned himself with a clear line of sight to both sentries. Using hand signals, he coordinated with Tank, who had moved to a position where he could engage the second sentry with his suppressed rifle if Ghost's initial shots weren't successful. Watched the synchronized precision with which the 2 SEALs prepared for their shots. At exactly 5:45 hours, Ghost's rifle coughed twice in rapid succession. Both enemy sentries dropped silently to the rocks below, eliminated before they could raise an alarm. Felt a surge of admiration for the lethal efficiency of her teammates, while also feeling sobered by the reality of their mission. The team immediately accelerated their movement toward the cave complex, knowing that they had a limited window before the missing sentries would be discovered. Struggled to keep pace as they navigated increasingly steep and treacherous terrain, but her physical conditioning allowed her to stay with the group. As they approached the cave entrance, could see the glow of artificial light emanating from deep within the mountain. The intelligence reports had been accurate. This was clearly an active facility rather than just a storage location. Jake made rapid adjustments to their assault plan based on the layout they could now observe directly. The assault began at exactly 6:30 hours with a coordinated advance from 2 directions. Positioned herself with Jake's assault element, ready to respond immediately to casualties while staying close enough to the action to provide effective medical support. The sound of gunfire erupted from within the cave complex as the SEALs encountered more resistance than anticipated. Could hear Jake's voice over their radio network, reporting multiple enemy contacts and requesting immediate support from the second assault element. Within minutes, Tank's voice crackled through their headsets with the call that had been dreading. "Corpsman up! Man down in the main cave!" Without hesitation, was moving toward the sound of ongoing gunfire, her medical training overriding any concern for her personal safety. The scene inside the cave was chaos. The weapons cache was enormous, far larger than intelligence had indicated, with crates of explosives and ammunition stacked floor to ceiling. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the cave walls, and the air was thick with smoke from gunfire and small explosions. Found the wounded SEAL near the back of the main cave. It was Petty Officer Second Class Alex Viper, Jake's younger brother who had joined the team 6 months earlier. He had taken a round to his chest, and blood was seeping through his body armor. His heart sank as she realized the severity of his injuries. Viper was conscious, but struggling to breathe, classic symptoms of a tension pneumothorax caused by the bullet puncturing his lung. Immediately began cutting away his body armor and clothing to access the wound site. She could see that the bullet had entered below his collarbone and was causing his lung to collapse. "Viper, I need you to stay calm and try to breathe slowly," instructed while preparing the equipment she would need to decompress his collapsed lung. The procedure she was about to perform was called a needle, and it required precise placement to be effective without causing additional damage. Located the correct anatomical landmarks on Viper's chest wall and cleaned the area with antiseptic solution. The gunfire around them was beginning to subside as the other SEALs gained control of the cave complex, but she remained focused entirely on her patient's critical condition. Using a large-bore needle, carefully inserted it between Viper's ribs at the precise location where it would relieve the pressure in his chest cavity. She was rewarded with an immediate hiss of escaping air, followed by visible improvement in Viper's breathing. The color began returning to his face as his lung re-expanded. Hammer appeared beside, providing security while she worked on Viper. She could see the intense focus in his eyes as he watched her perform the life-saving procedure under combat conditions. "Is he going to be okay, Doc?" Hammer asked quietly. "He's stable for now," replied while establishing IV access to replace the blood Viper had lost. "But he needs immediate evacuation to a trauma center. This is a temporary fix." Was calculating medication dosages while monitoring Viper's vital signs, which were slowly improving following her intervention. Jake arrived at their location, having completed the clearance of the weapons cache with the rest of the team. Could see the concern in his eyes when he saw his younger brother's condition, but his voice remained steady and professional as he coordinated their extraction. "Doc, how long can we keep him stable?" Jake asked while calling for immediate medical evacuation on his radio. Was honest in her assessment. "The needle decompression will hold for several hours if it stays in place, but if he recollapses or starts bleeding internally, we could lose him quickly. We need to get him to a surgeon as soon as possible." The medical evacuation helicopter was already en route, but it would take at least 90 minutes to reach their location due to the remote mountain terrain. Knew that maintaining Viper's condition during that time would require constant monitoring and possibly additional interventions. As the team prepared to move Viper to an extraction point suitable for helicopter landing, noticed that Hammer was staying close to her, observing every aspect of her patient care. She realized that this was his opportunity to evaluate her medical skills firsthand, just as the other team members had done during their first mission together. The extraction point was located on a ridge about half a mile from the cave complex, requiring a difficult climb while carrying Viper on an improvised stretcher. Supervised the movement carefully, ensuring that the needle in Viper's chest remained properly positioned and that his IV lines didn't become dislodged. During the climb, Hammer positioned himself beside the stretcher where he could help carry Viper while also observing ongoing medical care. "Doc," he said quietly as they navigated a particularly challenging section of rocky terrain, "I've never seen anyone perform a needle decompression under fire. That was impressive." Appreciated Hammer's recognition, but her focus remained entirely on monitoring Viper's condition. His breathing was stable, but she was concerned about potential internal bleeding that might not become apparent for several hours. She was also calculating how long their current supply of IV fluids would last if the evacuation was delayed. When they reached the extraction point, immediately established a more comprehensive treatment area using supplies from her medical kit. She replaced Viper's needle decompression with a more stable chest tube system that would be safer during helicopter transport. The procedure required precise placement to avoid damage to major blood vessels. While worked on improving Viper's chest tube placement, Tank approached their position with an update on the mission results. Doc, we found something in that cave that's going to make a lot of people happy. They had enough explosives to supply bomb makers for the next year, plus manufacturing equipment and training materials. Acknowledged Tank's report while never taking her attention away from Viper's medical care. She was pleased that their mission had been successful, but her priority remained ensuring her patient's survival until the medical evacuation helicopter arrived. Ghost had positioned himself with an elevated view of their extraction point, watching for any signs of enemy pursuit while also scanning the horizon for their incoming helicopter. "Doc," he called down to, "helicopter is 10 minutes out. How's our patient?" Checked Viper's vital signs once more. His blood pressure was stable, his breathing was regular, and his chest tube was functioning properly. "He's holding steady," she replied. "The helicopter crew needs to know that he has a chest tube in place and will need immediate surgical evaluation upon arrival at the trauma center." As the medical evacuation helicopter approached their location, prepared a detailed medical report for the flight crew. She documented Viper's injuries, the treatment she had provided, his current vital signs, and her assessment of his condition for transport. The helicopter's crew chief and flight medic quickly took over Viper's care, transferring him to the aircraft's advanced life support systems. Provided a comprehensive briefing to the flight medic, ensuring that he understood the specific nature of Viper's injuries and the treatments that had been provided. "Outstanding work, Corpsman," the flight medic told as they prepared for takeoff. "Your field treatment probably saved his life. He should make a full recovery with proper surgical care." As the helicopter disappeared into the distance carrying Viper to safety, felt the familiar mixture of relief and satisfaction that came with successfully treating a critically wounded teammate. She had once again performed complex medical procedures under extremely challenging conditions, and her patient was going to survive because of her skills and training. Jake approached as the team prepared to move to their secondary extraction point. "Doc, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for my brother. When I saw him go down, I thought—" His voice trailed off, but understood the depth of emotion behind his words. "He's going to be fine, Jake," replied simply. "That's what we do for each other." Hammer, who had observed Sin's entire medical performance, approached her as they began moving toward their extraction point. "Doc, I owe you an apology. When I heard the stories about what you did on the last mission, I figured they might be exaggerated. But after watching you work on Viper, I can see that your skills are exactly as advertised." Appreciated Hammer's honesty and recognized that she had now earned the confidence of another team member through her performance under pressure. Each mission seemed to present opportunities to prove herself to new people, and she was beginning to understand that this process of earning trust through demonstrated competence would be ongoing throughout her career. As they made their way through the mountain terrain toward their extraction point, reflected on how much her relationship with the team had evolved. She was no longer fighting to prove that she belonged. Instead, she was simply performing her role as the team's medical specialist with confidence and competence. The secondary extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, and the team quickly boarded for the flight back to their forward operating base. During the flight, found herself included naturally in the post-mission discussion, with team members seeking her input on various aspects of the operation. Ghost shared his perspective on medical performance during the mission. "Doc, watching you work on Viper was like watching an artist. You never hesitated, never second-guessed yourself, and your hands were completely steady despite everything going on around you." Realized that her teammates' respect for her abilities had reached a level where they were beginning to see her medical skills as something special rather than simply adequate. She had progressed from being someone who needed to prove herself to being someone whose capabilities exceeded their expectations. Back at the base, learned that both Martinez from their previous mission and Viper from this operation were recovering well. Martinez had completed his rehabilitation and was preparing to return to active duty, while Viper's surgery had been successful, and he was expected to make a complete recovery within a few months. The success of medical interventions in 2 consecutive high-stakes missions had not gone unnoticed by the command structure. She was called to another meeting with the mission commander, who informed her that her performance had earned recognition at the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Corpsman," the captain began, "I've received communications from several senior officers who are aware of your exceptional performance during recent operations. Your ability to provide advanced trauma care under combat conditions is being cited as an example of the kind of medical support that our special operations forces require. Was humbled by the recognition, but remained focused on her primary responsibility to her team. Sir, I'm just grateful that I was able to help my teammates when they needed it. The captain smiled at its response. That attitude, Corpsman, is exactly why you've been so successful with this team. You understand that in special operations, individual recognition is less important than collective success. As left the meeting, she realized that her journey from outsider to respected team member was complete. She had proven herself not once, but twice under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. More importantly, she had saved the lives of her teammates and earned their complete trust and respect through her actions rather than her words. That evening, as prepared her equipment for their next mission, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and belonging. She was no longer the new corpsman trying to fit into an established team. She was Doc, an integral member of one of the Navy's most elite units, whose medical skills had been proven in combat and whose courage under fire had earned her a permanent place among America's most elite warriors. 3 months had passed since successful treatment of Viper's collapsed lung, and she had become an indispensable member of the SEAL team. Her reputation as an exceptional combat medic had spread throughout the special operations community, and other units had begun requesting her expertise for particularly challenging missions. However, remained committed to her team, understanding that the trust and rapport they had built together was invaluable. The team's next assignment would test all of their skills in ways they had never experienced before. Intelligence had identified a terrorist training camp located in a remote valley along the Afghan-Pakistani border, where foreign fighters were being trained to conduct attacks in major Western cities. The camp was heavily fortified and situated in terrain that would make conventional assault extremely difficult. Jake called the team together for their initial briefing, spreading detailed satellite imagery across the table in their planning room. "This is our most challenging target yet," he began, pointing to various features on the photographs. "The camp is located in a box canyon with only one narrow entrance. Intelligence estimates between 50 and 75 enemy fighters, many of them experienced veterans from other conflicts." Studied the imagery carefully, noting the extreme isolation of the target location. The nearest medical facility was over 100 miles away, accessible only by helicopter across mountainous terrain that was frequently obscured by severe weather. If the team sustained casualties during this mission, she would need to keep wounded personnel alive for potentially 6 to 8 hours before evacuation would be possible. Ghost, who had been analyzing the tactical challenges posed by the target location, shared his assessment with the team. "The canyon entrance is a natural choke point that they're certain to have heavily defended. We're looking at a night insertion by fast rope from helicopters, followed by a steep descent into the valley under potential enemy fire." Felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she contemplated the medical challenges the mission would present. She would need to carry significantly more medical supplies than usual, including equipment for potential multiple casualties and extended care scenarios. The mountainous terrain and long evacuation distances meant that her treatment decisions could literally determine whether wounded team members survived or died. Tank expressed concern about the extraction plan, studying the satellite imagery with obvious worry. "If we take casualties in that canyon, getting wounded personnel back up these cliff faces is going to be nearly impossible under fire." Had been thinking about the same problem and had already begun developing contingency plans for treating casualties in the confined space of the canyon. "I've been reviewing our options," she said, addressing the team's concerns. "If we have wounded who can't be moved immediately, I can establish a casualty collection point in one of these cave formations near the canyon entrance." Jake was impressed by his proactive thinking about potential medical scenarios. Over the past 3 months, she had consistently demonstrated not just exceptional medical skills, but also tactical awareness that enhanced the team's overall operational effectiveness. Hammer, who had become one of strongest supporters after witnessing her treatment of Viper, raised another concern about the mission. "Doc, with this many potential enemy fighters, we could be looking at multiple casualties simultaneously. Are you prepared to handle that kind of scenario?" Had trained extensively for mass casualty situations, but she was honest about the challenges involved. "Multiple casualties would obviously strain our capabilities, but I've developed triage protocols that prioritize treatment based on survivability and mission impact. The key is making rapid decisions about who can be saved and who requires immediate evacuation. The team spent several days conducting rehearsals for the mission, practicing everything from helicopter insertion techniques to casualty evacuation procedures. Used this time to refine her medical load, ensuring that she carried the maximum amount of life-saving equipment while still maintaining her ability to move effectively with the team. During one of their training exercises, had the opportunity to demonstrate her mass casualty procedures when several team members role-played different types of injuries. Her ability to quickly assess multiple patients, prioritize treatments, and coordinate care impressed even the most experienced SEALs on the team. "Doc," Ghost observed after one particularly realistic training scenario, "you handle chaos better than anyone I've ever worked with. When things get crazy, you just seem to get calmer and more focused." Appreciated the recognition, but she understood that her apparent calmness under pressure came from extensive training and preparation. She had studied countless medical scenarios, memorized treatment protocols, and practiced emergency procedures until they became automatic responses to specific injury patterns. The night before their deployment, received unexpected news that would significantly impact the mission. Who had recovered from his shoulder wound would be rejoining the team for this operation. Additionally, they would be working with a second SEAL team that would assault the canyon from the opposite end, creating a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the enemy's defenses. The addition of a second team meant that might need to provide medical support for up to 16 personnel rather than the usual 8. She immediately began recalculating her medical load and developing new protocols for coordinating care across multiple casualties from 2 separate units. His return to the team was emotionally significant for. He had been her first patient under combat conditions, and his successful recovery and return to duty validated her field treatment of his injuries. "Doc," said as they prepared their equipment, "it's good to be working with you again. I feel safer knowing you're watching our backs." The mission launch was scheduled for 2200 hours, with helicopter insertion planned for just after midnight. Conducted a final check of her medical equipment, ensuring that everything was properly secured and easily accessible. She carried nearly twice her usual load of medical supplies, but her physical conditioning allowed her to manage the additional weight. As the helicopters lifted off into the night sky, found herself sitting between and Hammer, 2 SEALs whose lives she had directly impacted through her medical skills. She realized that her relationship with each team member now included shared experiences of life-threatening situations where her competence had made the difference between life and death. The flight to the target area took nearly 2 hours, crossing mountainous terrain that was among the most challenging helicopter flying conditions in the world. Used the time to review her treatment protocols once more and to mentally prepare for the complex medical scenarios she might encounter. As they approached the insertion point, Jake provided a final briefing over their radio headsets. "Remember, we're going into an unknown situation with potentially overwhelming enemy numbers. Stay alert, watch each other's backs, and be prepared to adapt quickly if things go wrong." The fast rope insertion into the canyon was executed flawlessly, with both SEAL teams successfully reaching the valley floor without being detected by enemy sentries. Felt her boots hit the rocky ground and immediately moved to her assigned position in the formation, her enhanced medical load secured but easily accessible. The assault on the terrorist training camp began at exactly 30 hours with coordinated attacks from both ends of the canyon. Could hear the sound of gunfire erupting from multiple directions as the 2 SEAL teams engaged what turned out to be a larger enemy force than intelligence had estimated. Within minutes of the assault beginning, heard the call she had been preparing for. "Multiple casualties, all available corpsmen to the north end of the compound." Heart raced as she realized that the second SEAL team had encountered heavy resistance and sustained several wounded personnel. Sprinted across the compound under covering fire from her teammates, her medical bag bouncing against her back as she navigated obstacles and debris scattered throughout the area. The scene that greeted her was the most challenging medical situation she had ever encountered. 3 SEALs were down with various injuries, and gunfire was still ongoing from enemy positions in the surrounding rocks. Immediately began triaging the casualties, making rapid assessments of each wound and prioritizing her treatment based on survivability and severity. The first casualty had taken a round to his abdomen and was bleeding heavily from what appeared to be liver damage. Quickly established IV access and began fluid resuscitation while applying direct pressure to control external bleeding. This was a critical injury that would require immediate surgical intervention. The second SEAL had suffered shrapnel wounds to both legs from an enemy grenade, with significant muscle damage but no apparent arterial bleeding. Applied tourniquets to both legs and administered pain medication, categorizing him as stable for delayed evacuation. The third casualty was the most challenging. He had taken a high-velocity round to his chest that had damaged his heart and major blood vessels. Could see immediately that his injuries were not survivable given their current location and resources. She made the difficult decision to focus her efforts on the casualties she could save. Working with incredible speed and precision, managed to stabilize the abdominal wound patient and prepare him for immediate evacuation. The liver injury was severe, but her field treatment had controlled the bleeding and maintained his blood pressure within survivable limits. Tank appeared beside as she worked on the casualties, providing security while also helping to coordinate the medical evacuation. "Doc, how many can we save?" he asked grimly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "2 definite saves if we can get them out of here quickly," replied without stopping her work. "The chest wound is too severe for field treatment." His ability to make rapid triage decisions under extreme pressure demonstrated the kind of clinical judgment that could only come from extensive training and experience. The medical evacuation helicopter was already en route, but knew that maintaining her patient's conditions for the next hour would require all of her skills and resources. She had used a significant portion of her medical supplies treating the 3 casualties and would need to carefully manage her remaining resources. As the firefight continued around them, noticed that several members of both SEAL teams were watching her work with obvious amazement. Her ability to function effectively in the midst of chaos, making life-and-death decisions while bullets flew overhead, had impressed even these elite warriors. Ghost, who was providing sniper support from an elevated position, called down to over their radio network. "Doc, you're performing miracles down there. I've never seen anything like it." Acknowledged Ghost's comment, but remained focused entirely on her patients. The SEAL with abdominal injuries was showing signs of internal bleeding that required constant monitoring and adjustment of his IV fluid rates. She was also concerned about potential complications from the shrapnel wounds in the second patient's legs. Jake coordinated with to prepare a landing zone for the medical evacuation helicopter in a relatively protected area of the canyon. Moving the casualties to the evacuation point would be dangerous, requiring them to cross open ground that was still under enemy observation. "Doc, can they handle movement?" Jake asked, understanding that transportation of critically injured patients could worsen their conditions. Assessed both of her stable patients carefully. "The abdominal case is marginal for transport, but he'll die if we don't get him to surgery. The leg wounds are stable enough for careful movement." His ability to balance medical considerations with tactical realities demonstrated her understanding of combat medicine's unique challenges. The movement to the landing zone was conducted under covering fire from both SEAL teams, with monitoring her patient's vital signs throughout the evacuation. She had established portable IV pumps that allowed her to maintain fluid resuscitation during transport, a technique she had practiced but never used under actual combat conditions. When the medical evacuation helicopter arrived, provided detailed briefings to the flight crew about each patient's injuries and treatment. Her thorough documentation and clear communication ensured that the hospital medical team would be prepared to continue treatment immediately upon the patient's arrival. As the helicopter lifted off with her patients, felt the familiar mixture of relief and concern that came with combat medical situations. She had done everything possible under the circumstances, but the ultimate outcome would depend on the surgical interventions that were beyond her capabilities. The mission continued for another 3 hours as both SEAL teams systematically cleared the terrorist training camp and collected valuable intelligence materials. Remained on high alert throughout this period, ready to respond to additional casualties while also treating minor injuries and providing preventive medical care. When the operation was finally completed, learned that her medical interventions had been successful. Both of the critically wounded SEALs she had treated survived their surgeries and were expected to make complete recoveries. Her rapid triage decisions and expert field treatment had once again saved the lives of fellow warriors under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. As the team prepared for extraction from the canyon, Hammer approached with obvious respect and admiration. "Doc, what I witnessed tonight was beyond exceptional. You handled a mass casualty situation under fire like a veteran trauma surgeon. I've never seen anything like it." Appreciated the recognition from her teammates, but she was already thinking ahead to the lessons learned from this mission and how she could improve her performance in future operations. Each combat medical situation presented unique challenges and opportunities for professional growth. The extraction from the canyon was completed without additional casualties, and the helicopters carrying both SEAL teams lifted off into the pre-dawn sky. During the flight back to their base, found herself surrounded by teammates who wanted to express their appreciation for her exceptional performance under the most demanding circumstances they had ever encountered. Whose own life had saved months earlier, summed up the team's feelings perfectly. "Doc, you're not just our medic anymore. You're the reason we all feel confident taking on impossible missions. Knowing you're there watching our backs gives us the courage to face any enemy." As looked around at the faces of her teammates, she realized that her journey from outsider to respected team member had evolved into something even more significant. She had become not just an accepted member of the team, but an essential component of their operational capability. Her medical skills had proven to be a force multiplier that enhanced the effectiveness of the entire unit. The success of her medical interventions during this mission would establish reputation throughout the special operations community as one of the most skilled combat medics in the Navy. But the greatest reward was the knowledge that she had saved the lives of fellow warriors and earned her place among America's most elite fighters through her dedication, skill, and courage under fire. 6 months after the Canyon mission, had become something of a legend within Naval Special Warfare Command. Her exceptional performance treating casualties under the most extreme circumstances had earned her recognition from the highest levels of military leadership. But more importantly, it had established her as an indispensable member of her SEAL team. The team's dynamics had evolved far beyond simple acceptance of presence. Her medical expertise had become so integral to their operational planning that missions were now designed around maximizing her ability to provide life-saving care in remote locations. Jake often consulted with during the planning phase, ensuring that medical considerations were incorporated into every aspect of their operations. His reputation had attracted attention from other elite units, and she regularly received requests for temporary assignments with different teams. However, she consistently declined these opportunities, understanding that the trust and rapport she had built with her current team represented years of shared experiences that couldn't be replicated quickly with new personnel. The team's latest mission would prove to be their most challenging yet, both tactically and medically. Intelligence had identified a high-value terrorist leader who was planning a major attack against civilian targets in Europe. The target was hiding in a fortified compound located in one of the most remote and dangerous regions of Afghanistan, accessible only by helicopter insertion, followed by a grueling 3-day movement through enemy-controlled territory. During the mission briefing, studied the terrain maps and satellite imagery with growing concern. The target location was over 200 miles from the nearest friendly medical facility, and the route to the compound crossed several mountain ranges that were frequently impassable due to severe weather conditions. "This is going to be our longest duration mission," Jake explained to the team. "We'll be completely self-sufficient for up to 5 days, with no possibility of resupply or reinforcement. If we encounter significant resistance or take casualties, we'll be on our own until we can reach an extraction point." Immediately began calculating the medical implications of such an extended operation. She would need to carry enough supplies to treat potential casualties for several days, including antibiotics, pain medications, and equipment for advanced trauma care. The weight of her medical load would be enormous, but the team's survival might depend on her ability to provide extended medical support. Tank expressed concern about its ability to carry such an extensive medical load while maintaining the mobility necessary for the mission. "Doc, You're talking about carrying almost 100 pounds of medical gear through some of the most challenging terrain in Afghanistan. Are you sure that's manageable? Had been thinking about the same problem and had developed a solution that would require unprecedented cooperation from her teammates. I've worked out a distribution plan where each team member carries specific medical supplies that I might need for extended care scenarios. Everyone becomes part of the medical support system. The concept of distributing medical supplies among team members was innovative and demonstrated understanding of how to integrate medical considerations into overall mission planning. Each SEAL would carry specific medications, bandages, or equipment that might need to treat casualties, turning the entire team into a mobile medical facility. Ghost was intrigued by this approach to the logistical challenges. Doc, that's actually brilliant. Instead of you carrying everything, we all become part of your medical capability. It distributes the weight and ensures that critical supplies are always available even if we get separated. Spent several days working with each team member to ensure they understood exactly what medical supplies they were carrying and how those supplies might be used in various emergency scenarios. This training process also enhanced the team's overall medical knowledge, giving each SEAL basic understanding of trauma care procedures. The mission included an additional complication that would test leadership skills as well as her medical capabilities. A Navy intelligence specialist would be accompanying the team to collect information from the target compound, and this individual had no combat experience or advanced medical training. Lieutenant Junior Grade Sarah was a brilliant intelligence analyst who spoke several local languages and had expertise in terrorist communication networks. However, her presence would add another person to potential patient load while also requiring protection during the mission. Met with Lieutenant during the pre-mission preparation phase to discuss medical considerations for the operation. Lieutenant, I need you to understand that this mission will involve extreme physical demands and potential exposure to combat conditions. Are you prepared for that level of stress and danger? Lieutenant was honest about her concerns, but determined to complete her mission. Corpsman, I understand the risks involved. I've been training for months to prepare for this operation, and I know how important the intelligence we're seeking could be for preventing terrorist attacks. Appreciated Lieutenant's candor and dedication, but she was also concerned about having a non-combatant in the team during such a dangerous operation. She worked with Jake to develop specific protocols for protecting and evacuating Lieutenant if the team encountered heavy resistance. The mission launch was delayed for 24 hours due to severe weather in the target area, giving additional time to finalize her medical preparations. She used this time to conduct final equipment checks and to review casualty evacuation procedures with the entire team. During this preparation period, received a visit from Martinez, the SEAL whose life she had saved during her first combat mission nearly a year earlier. He had completed his rehabilitation and was preparing to return to operational status with a different team. Doc, Martinez said as he found preparing her medical equipment, I heard about your latest mission assignment. I wanted to come by and tell you how proud I am of what you've accomplished with this team. Was touched by Martinez's visit and realized how much her relationship with the SEAL community had evolved since that first terrifying mission when she had frantically worked to save his life under enemy fire. Martinez, seeing you back on your feet and ready for operational duty is one of the most rewarding things about this job, replied sincerely. Your recovery proves that the field medical care we provide can really make a difference in the long term. Martinez shared his perspective on its impact on the special operations community. Doc, word about your medical skills has spread throughout the teams. Everyone knows that if they're wounded and you're their corpsman, they're going home alive. That kind of confidence is invaluable for operators who face life-threatening situations every day. The mission finally launched 48 hours behind schedule, with the team boarding helicopters for the initial insertion into enemy territory. Carried her standard medical load plus additional supplies distributed among her teammates, creating a comprehensive mobile medical capability that could sustain the team for an extended period. The helicopter insertion was conducted at night in mountainous terrain that pushed the aircraft and crew to their operational limits. Felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as they approached the landing zone, knowing that they were beginning what could be the most challenging mission of her career. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by steep rocky slopes, barely large enough for the helicopter to touch down safely. Exited the aircraft quickly with her teammates and lieutenant, immediately taking cover as the helicopter departed, leaving them alone in hostile territory. Jake established their initial formation for the movement toward the target compound, positioning in the center of the group where she could respond quickly to casualties from any direction. Lieutenant stayed close to, understanding that her survival depended on the team's medical and tactical expertise. The movement through enemy territory was slow and methodical, with the team covering only a few miles each day while avoiding enemy patrols and observation posts. Found the extended operation mentally and physically demanding, requiring constant vigilance while carrying her heavy medical load across challenging terrain. On the second day of movement, the team encountered their first significant challenge when Ghost developed severe symptoms of altitude sickness while crossing a high mountain pass. The combination of extreme elevation, cold temperatures, and physical exertion had overwhelmed his body's ability to adapt to the thin air. Immediately recognized the symptoms and began treatment for acute mountain sickness, administering oxygen from portable bottles and medications to reduce brain swelling. Ghost's condition was serious enough to potentially compromise the mission if it progressed to more severe complications. Ghost needs to descend to lower altitude as quickly as possible, told Jake after completing her medical assessment. If his condition worsens, we could be looking at life-threatening brain swelling or fluid in his lungs. Jake faced a difficult decision. Descending to lower altitude would add at least a day to their movement time and increase their exposure to enemy patrols in the valleys below. However, Ghost's medical condition left them with no viable alternatives. Managed Ghost's condition during their descent, monitoring his symptoms and adjusting his medications based on his response to the altitude change. Her ability to diagnose and treat altitude sickness in the field demonstrated the breadth of her medical knowledge beyond just trauma care. By the third day, Ghost's condition had improved sufficiently for the team to resume their movement toward the target compound. Prompt recognition and treatment of his altitude sickness had prevented a potentially mission-ending medical emergency while also preserving Ghost's long-term health. The target compound was located in a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountain walls, accessible only through a single defended pass. Intelligence indicated that the terrorist leader maintained a small security force, but the